Welcome to Farmers Universe. In this podcast, we'll create content based on people and facts, which can inspire and help you in improving your farm performance. For decades, farmers have used zinc oxide to prevent post-weaning diarrhea, but not anymore. Zinc oxide has been banned by the European Union for usage to control or manage post-weaning diarrhea. And that is the topic we are discussing today in this very first episode of the Vilofoss podcast, Farmers Universe. My name is Jacob, and I'm a communications consultant in DLG. And here in the studio in Denmark, I have a visitor, Jacob Dall. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you.
Jacob is R&D and technical manager in Vilofoss, and he has a big knowledge about this topic on medical usage of zinc. So, Jacob, let's just start here. Could you, first of all, make a short resume of the usage of zinc oxide? Why have farms been using this for decades in feed for piglets and in pig production in general?
Yeah, you can say that using zinc oxide at high levels, medical use, meaning anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 ppm, was shown, first of all, in the late 80s or early 90s by some Danish researchers that it had a very good reducing effect on post-weaning diarrhea, and this is where the use actually was initiated.
And for now, it has been banned over whole Europe. And why has it been banned, so to speak?
I'm not sure, 7-8 years ago, maybe there was some research that showed that using zinc at this level could actually potentially support the development of antibiotic resistance in some bacteria, and also due to the fact that the pigs do not absorb very much of this zinc, it means that it will be excreted by the manure, eventually ending up in the fields. And as also the plants do not remove that much zinc from the soil, over time there will be a build-up of zinc in the soils. So that was also an area of concern.
So it's like an environmental issue?
Yes.
Okay.
In theory, waiting long enough, zinc, as it is actually categorized as a heavy metal, okay. Zinc is toxic when the concentrations are too high, meaning that theoretically we could end up in a situation where some areas we would be unable to grow anything in these areas. Of course, this would be 150 or 100 years out in the future, but taking care of things well in time is absolutely needed for something like this.
Yeah, we have to prepare the soil for future generations, right?
Yeah.
So in your opinion and in Vilofoss's opinion, what is the recipe to come out successfully in this quite a huge change for pig production and the weaning process?
Well, first of all, of course, doing all the right things at the right time and keep on doing it is the most important part. And we know from any other challenge in the pig production that this is actually a real challenge, because every day doing more or less, or at least every week doing the same work will end up in being a routine, and it's so easy to sort of slide away from the correct way of doing it. When that being said, also formulating the feed in a different way, a less challenging way than what we have been used to, surely also helps out in coping with this challenge.
So it's a lot about consistency.
Definitely, yes.
And also, I know that Vilofoss is very much aware of the management in the farms. Can you tell a bit about that?
Yeah, as I said, management is sort of doing all the right things, maybe even adapted to your specific farm conditions. We've done a lot of work sort of collecting all the best experiences, describing the best way to do different procedures, to perform different procedures. And we've collected that in a compendium that sort of describes this. It does not necessarily fit every farm, but it's a sort of a catalog to get inspired from, to compare what are we doing today and can we change this into something more effective.
Okay, because you just said this is biology, right? So could you put some words in the difference, in pigs and farms? And it doesn't sound like one fits all mentality, right?
No, exactly. First of all, the health status of farms is different. Of course, in some systems you have it on paper, you have it written on the door or whatever. You have a formal health status, but everybody working with pigs also realize that even farms with the same official health status will experience different challenges from diseases and so on. So the first step is to take charge of the health management of the farm, vaccinations, maybe even consider a depop, repop, getting rid of diseases, also protecting the farm external biosecurity, but also thinking of the internal biosecurity. And of course, this is different from farm to farm. And then also the conditions. Some farms have a low weaning weight and age, others have a higher, and everything actually is a part of what is needed, what needs maybe to be changed in order to cope with this challenge.
Okay, and what about the feed? Do we have to put it together in different ways that we used to do?
Yeah, you could say, first of all, actually feeding piglets before weaning, pre-weaning, is essential because one of the things that we see is that pigs, after weaning, some pigs go into a state of anorexia, meaning that they can go for as long as 3 days without eating. And this has a very detrimental effect on the gut health. So we can cope with that by offering feed before weaning. But secondly, also, we need to think more in a more easy way with the zinc oxide. Maybe if we go further back with the antibiotics, we could get away with a feed formulation that was a little bit more challenging on the pig. Now we don't have these measures to control and manage the pig health, so we need to achieve this through the selection of components and formulation of the feed.
And what about, I also heard that water is a pretty huge deal in this topic. Could you put some words in that?
Yeah, also sometimes we actually use the term that water is the cheapest medicine available, meaning that if pigs drink sufficiently, the risk of developing any kind of disease is actually smaller, especially when we talk about gut-related diseases. So a good water supply, what we can do also is adding some acidification to this water to support the health of the gut health of the pig, sure will help as well.
And now the deadline for the usage of zinc oxide, it actually expired in June this year. So what are the challenges at the farms right now? I know they have been working for this in the southern Europe for some years. So in Denmark we are a bit late. We are actually later than the countries in the southern Europe. So what are the difficulties at the farms right now?
Well, of course, the fact is that currently the pig producers all over Europe are facing a sort of, you could say, an economic crisis. The pig prices are relatively low, but the feed prices have increased dramatically, meaning that the profitability in pig production is almost non-existent, which of course means that the farmers have a harder time adapting to using other feed, spending more money, spending more man hours in the farms. But what we see is that a lot of Danish farmers seems to have confidence in that the solutions would be available. So due to this profitability issue, they were like, okay, we're just going to keep on going in the cheapest possible way until the very end, and then we'll change. And we see that most of these actually have had pretty good luck by doing the transformation. But of course, we expect that there will be some challenges.
So what you are telling me is that Danish farmers has a lot of trust in DLG and Vilofoss and so on.
Very much, very much. We have a few customers that was actually years ago trying out the solutions without the zinc oxide, concluded that, well, we know we can manage. We'll just go for the cheaper solution until we are forced to change.
Yeah, okay. And one of the issues in the near future could be the usage of antibiotics. What is your opinion in that, and what do you see in the near future regarding that?
If we look back to the early 2000s, we saw that with the discontinuance of the antibiotic growth promoters in Denmark, we saw that the antibiotic use for therapeutical purposes increased shortly. And I also actually expect that it will happen here when we get rid of the zinc oxide, because also with a Danish perspective, we know that Denmark has been one of the countries with the lowest antibiotic consumption in pig production, probably due to the fact that we have had an extensive use of zinc oxide. So I fear or expect an increase, but I'm also confident that we will manage and get back on track. And I assume it will be similar in the rest of Europe.
Okay, how long will the period be, if in your mind?
Well, it's always difficult to predict the future, but I would not be surprised if we were looking into 3 to 6 months.
Okay. I would like to ask you, do you see any pros regarding, or not pros, but also benefits from not using zinc oxide in the feed?
One thing we know is that zinc oxide has a very poor palatability, meaning the feed intake probably have been suppressed due to the use of zinc oxide. Also, although the legislation only allowed the use of zinc oxide high levels in 2 weeks after weaning, it has been in some cases used for a longer time, and we see that feed conversion also is impaired when using high levels of zinc oxide. So I'm actually pretty confident that feed intake will be better, providing, of course, we can control the post-weaning diarrhea or avoid the post-weaning diarrhea. Then we will see a higher feed intake, and usually with pigs of this size and age, higher feed intake also means higher daily gain. So it would not be wrong to expect that, well managed, we can actually achieve a better productivity.
Okay. Will we see any local huge challenges, like it will be an easy turnaround in Denmark, for example, and a very difficult turnaround in Hungary or so on? What do you see in that perspective?
I think that there's some differences between the countries. We know, for example, that our French colleagues already started last year working without the zinc oxide, and the approach in the different countries have been different. So yes, I think we've had a different sort of way of facing in the change. In Denmark, also due to the strategy of the farmers, it's very sudden, more or less from one day to another, for the majority at least. Where in other countries, the change have been more 1-2 years maybe. I think basically that every professional pig farmer will be able to do the change. I don't think there will be a big difference between the countries. I think it's more on a farm level that some farms will be more challenged than others. I think that's fair to expect.
And Jacob, we have to sum up a bit. What are the key takeaways for the listeners from this talk?
Well, you could say that management is a very important part of this. And I'm sure everybody is doing their best. But to manage this transition, we need to just do a little bit better. And this is might be a little bit irritating to hear constantly, but unfortunately this is the truth. But then secondly, I also want to say that the management adaptations can be done on a relatively low cost level, where as soon as we need to go in and reformulate the feed, often it will come at a higher cost. You can ask several Danish advisors who's been calculating this and estimating it. But it is possible. We know what to do reformulating the feed. We also know what to expect, what impact to expect on the productivity when we do these changes in the feed. Because some will reduce productivity, others can help increasing productivity. So management and feed goes hand in hand.
So that was the key takeaways. I'll just Thank you for this talk, Jacob, but now we have to move on to the next element in this Vilofoss podcast, Farmers Universe. So now we have to move on to 5 questions. We call it 5 for farmers. So Jacob, please answer quick, but also we want the good story if I ask you a question regarding that. So I'll ask you 5 questions now, and you can answer them when I do so. So the first question is, what is the most exciting experience you've had on a farm?
Well, there's a lot. I've been in this business for more than 20 years, so there's been a few. But basically, I can say that the most exciting situation when I go to a farm is when the farmers or the farm workers actually appreciate my inputs or advice. And even though it can also be a little bit scary when everybody's doing what you are suggesting. But that's what I find very giving, that we can have a very good dialogue on what changes potentially to make in the farm.
And the second question is, what is your favorite animal?
Well, cows, no, of course. I've been working with pigs basically since I could walk, so it'll have to be the pig.
And the third question is, what is your favorite meal?
Well, also, most meals are good. I'm not that picky, but even though I enjoy, of course, a good steak, well-cooked pork chop or pork fillet is definitely one of my favorites.
And the fourth question is, on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is the highest, how much do you think of sustainability in your everyday life?
Again, if you ask me 1 year ago...
You have to answer fast, Jacob.
1 year ago, 2, today, 8, 9.
Okay, that's a huge change. And the last question for today, how was it to join Farmers Universe?
Very interesting. Quick questions, yes. Quick answers required. But I enjoyed it, and I hope that there will be another topic to come back on at a later time.
Thank you for joining us, Jacob. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And remember that you can follow this podcast where you hear a podcast. Just search for Farmers Universe, and you can also subscribe for it. I will just thank you for listening to this very first episode of Farmers Universe. Thank you.